Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Li Bo, and I'm a recent master graduate from the University of Manchester, UK. Thank you for being here today. I'm excited to present our recent work titled Beyond Reconstruction, Generating Privacy in Preserving Clinical Letters. This research lies at the intersection of privacy protection and natural language generation and aims to alleviate privacy risks by generating substitute clinical letters, rather than relying on traditional de-identification techniques. This presentation will be roughly divided into 4 parts: motivation and introduction, methodology, results, and conclusion. Okay, let's begin with the introduction and motivation. Clinical letters are essential for communication across healthcare departments, and they play a key role in education, research, and model training. However, due to their sensitive nature, clinical letters are often inaccessible. A major challenge in this field is how to obtain enough clinical data while still protecting patient privacy. Existing public datasets like MIMIC and N2B2 offer de-identified records, but they are typically limited to specific institutions or regions, which makes them less representative of broader clinical scenarios. To address this issue, many researchers have focused on building advanced language models to accurately detect and remove privacy information, such as through tools like filter. Unlike previous work, we proposed an alternative solution based on static text generation. This approach indirectly protects patients' privacy, while also introduce diversity to support better generalization. To implement this idea, we designed a system with 2 main goals: detecting privacy-sensitive information and regenerate substitute words while preserving clinical coherence. To achieve these goals, we investigate the following techniques: model selection, segmentation strategies, and masking techniques. Specifically, for privacy detection, we adopt a hybrid method combining rule-based approaches and named entity recognition models and NER models. To introduce diversity, we not only mask private information but also explore different masking strategies based on their part of speech, POS, and whether a word is a stop word. This also contributes to anonymization in an indirect manner. Additionally, we explore paragraph-level segmentation based on sentence blocks, instead of mechanically splitting a long letter into several 256 token chunks, in order to better preserve the integrity of the original meaning. For the language models, we used encoder-only models such as the BERT family, as well as encoder-decoder models like the T5 family. Imagine a typical clinical letter like the one showed in the figure, containing a segment with private information. It may contain private information such as the name Joe, age 35 years old, which was anonymized and replaced with underscores in the original dataset, and date August 5th, 2024. We also mask some pronouns he, verbs visiting, and adverbs heavily for the purpose of regeneration. For generation, we expect results similar to the example shown in the figure. The name Joe could be regenerated as a patient or another name like him, so that the privacy is protected. This can also be replaced with terms like yesterday, since an informed person might infer the patient's identity from the visit date and medical condition. For future work, we hope these static substitute words can carry representative features. For example, a clinical letter may use different dates, but still follow specific temporary sequence and time intervals, as the information can be crucial for diagnosis and treatment. We also aim to regenerate less critical words. For instance, drinking heavily could be replaced with drinking alcohol to preserve the clinical narratives while varying the expression. Another example is substituting he visited the doctor with he saw the doctor. With this example in mind, let me briefly describe how we evaluate generating the letters. We applied various evaluation methods ranging from automatic metrics to qualitative human evaluation. We also conducted a downstream NER tests to explore whether the static letters can serve as substitutes for the original ones. As for ethical considerations, since these static letters have not been used for commercial purposes, there are currently no ethical risks involved. However, the copyright of these static letters should still be discussed as the system becomes more mature and is applied to real-world clinical letters. That wraps up the overview of our work. Next, I'll walk you through the methodology in more details. For methodology, I'll introduce the following 5 aspects: clinical letter segmentation, privacy recognition, masking strategies, model exploration, and for masking and generation, and evaluation methods. Let's begin with the clinical letter segmentation. We use different pre-trained language models for generation in this project. Since these models typically have a token limitation usually around 512 tokens, but each clinical letter contains thousands of tokens, we needed to split them into smaller chunks. Most previous work segments text based purely on token count, without considering how sentence completeness might impact the model's understanding. To address this limitation, we applied a variable-less segmentation approach. To clarify this, let's still walk through an example. As shown in the figure, this is a segment extracting from a clinical letter. First, we split the text into individual sentences based on add punctuation, such as periods and exclamation marks. For simplicity, we refer to this sentence as A, B, C, and D. Due to the model's token limit, we introduced a parameter called max tokens, which controls the maximum number of tokens per chunk. Some sentences may be quite long and span multiple lines. To further constrain chunk size, we introduced another parameter called max lines, which limits the number of lines per chunk. Our goal is for max tokens and max lines to broadly control chunk size, while still grouping sentences together. For example, if max lines is set to 8 and max tokens to 32, we can add sentence A to block 1 without exceeding either limit. Next, we can add sentence B to block 1, again, still within the limits. When we attempt to add sentence C, we find that doing so would exceed the max tokens limit. Therefore, sentence C is placed in block 2. As a result, block 1 contains only sentence 1 and sentence A and sentence B. This is just a simplified illustration. In our experiments, we set max tokens to 256 and optimized max lines based on inference time and the average number of tokens per chunk, which is discussed in more detail in our papers. Next, let's talk about the privacy recognition. Privacy recognition is not a major focus of our work, since the dataset we use mimic can already be anonymized. Nevertheless, we're still implementing a double-check step for this part. Specifically, we use a privacy detection NER model called STAZA combined with a custom rule-based method using regular expressions to identify private information such as names, emails, home addresses, and so on. These detected elements must be masked in the following steps. Before masking clinical letters, we perform a pre-processing step for feature extraction. Specifically, we extracting the following types of features. Let's look at the table 1. Document structure, it defines the format of the document, and then we detect privacy information which must be masked for privacy protection. For medical terminologies, it should be preserved due to its importance for clinical narratives and for special patterns, for example, medical dosage and abbreviations, it may confuse the language models. For post-tagging, it was used to evaluate how different grammatical components influence the model's understanding and whether they can be used for indirect anonymization and to introduce variety. Based on the extracting features, we explored the following masking strategies, as shown in this table. First, we implemented random masking with different masking ratios gradually from 0 to 1, increasing by 10 increments. This provided a general evaluation of how the proportion of masked tokens affects results. Then we separately applied masking to only verbs, only nouns, and only stop words, still using a 10% increment. This allows us to assess vertically whether these categories show trends similar to random masking. Since different components have different base frequencies, masking 20% of nouns and 20% of verbs may result in different absolute numbers of masked tokens. To control for this variety, we are also conducting experiments with a fixed number of masked tokens. In this data, for instance, we mask a fixed 20% of total tokens in each clinical letters, but constrain all masked tokens to be formed one specific category, such as only verbs or only stop words. This allowed us to compare horizontally how different components influence the quality of static letters. Finally, we experimented with hybrid masking for evaluating how combinations of categories affect performance. For example, masking 15% of nouns and 15% of stop words at the same time. Next, let's move on to the model exploration for masking and generation. For model selection, we mainly used a masking and generation framework, including encoder-only models such as reporter-based, bioclinical BERT, medical AI clinical BERT, and clinical law form. Encoder-only models are typically designed for language understanding and mask language modeling, so we simply applied their standard usage. We further explored encoder-decoder models due to their strong performance on generation tasks. These models are generally used for autoregressive text generation, so we deleted the words to be masked and replaced them with blanks. We then provided a prompt, such as filling in the blanks in the following sentences in clinical background. For encoder-decoder models, we experimented with different versions of T5, including T5 base and several T5 clinical T5. For evaluation, as mentioned at the beginning, we use qualitative evaluation, and downstream NER evaluation. For qualitative evaluation, we assess the results from three perspectives. The first one is standard NLG metrics, such as BERT score, Roche, and others. And the next one, readability metrics, including smog and flash reading ease. And next one, advanced text quality metrics, such as perplexity, subjectivity, and information entropy. After conducting these qualitative evaluations, we compared the results with quantitative observations. Specifically, we looked at which static clinical letters were considered satisfactory by human judgment, and whether they also performed well in certain quantitative metrics. Based on this cooperation, we aim to identify the most suitable quantitative metrics for our task. For the downstream NER evaluation, we used an existing NER model size-by-C to extract named entities and train another NER model using spacing to compare the consistency of extracting entities. If the original and synthetic letters produce similar scores, it suggests that our masking and regeneration process does not negatively affect the usability of synthetic letters in NER tasks. Okay, let's on for the methodology part. Let's move to the results we obtained. Based on the methods I just described, we obtained several interesting results. Firstly, encoder-only models such as BERT actually outperformed encoder-decoder models like T5, even though the latter are typically considered more suitable for generation tasks. Secondly, and perhaps counterintuitively, clinical domain PLMs did not significantly outperform general domain ones. We speculate that when key clinical information is preserved, both types of models perform comparably. Thirdly, preserving clinical entities and document structures turned out to be more effective than just fine-tuning alone. Moving on to the masking strategies, we found that masking stop words actually improve text quality, while masking nouns or verbs tend to be discrete. For privacy protection, masking stop words can help introduce static variety and indirectly anonymized content. Nouns, while often privacy sensitive, should be masked selectively to avoid damaging content quality. Verbs, on the other hand, are crucial for maintaining narrative's coherence and should generally be left intact. In terms of evaluation, BERT score aligned closely with human judgment, making it our most reliable quantitative metrics. Other metrics can still used to be supplementary tools. Interestingly, contextual information had minimal impact. Even without strong context, static clinical letters still performed well in downstream NER tasks. This suggests that synthetic letters can effectively replace original ones in many practical NLP applications. Overall, we present a framework that can help address the scarcity of clinical letters while also embedding privacy considerations directly into the generation process. Last, let's summarize our contributions and briefly discuss the limitations and possible directions for future work. Unlike previous studies that mainly focus on detecting and removing private information, we proposed an indirect approach, regenerating sensitive content without ever exposing real privacy data. We tested this idea using clinical letters and explored both encoder-only models like the BERT family and encoder-decoder models like T5 to generate the text. This allowed us to consider both privacy protection and the preservation of clinical narratives. At the same time, in addition, we identified substitutes evaluation methods and showed that the static letters performed well in downstream tasks, such as NER tasks. Although we believe this work is valuable for generating language models to handle real-world sensitive datasets, we acknowledge that there are still some limitations. The first limitation is quite obvious, and perhaps some of you have already thought about it. We did not quantitatively evaluate how well the models protect privacy, such as how many sensitive terms were correctly masked or substituted. This is because the dataset we used was already anonymized. In future work, we plan to use datasets that contain a wider range of sensitive entities and privacy categories. We also aim to include some evaluation techniques such as PHI detection models, membership inference attacks, and model intersection attacks. Another limitation is that the models struggle with low-tail phenomenon, especially when dealing with low-frequency terms or domain-specific abbreviations. They also occasionally misinterpret medical shorthand, which can lead to semantic errors. To address this, we are exploring ways to enhance encoder-only models, possibly using dynamic vocabularies or continually learning techniques. So far, I've briefly introduced the motivations, methodology, key results, and some of the limitations and future work. Thank you for your attention. If you have any questions or suggestions, please feel free to reach out. My email is shown here.